Commander Park Ji-hoon had been drinking his morning coffee when the emergency alarm shattered the peaceful silence of the UES thunderstrike. Red lights bathed the bridge in an ominous glow as crew members rushed to their stations. Ji-hoon sat down, his mug, and moved to the command chair, his experienced eyes immediately scanning the tactical displays. "What do we have, Lieutenant?" he asked, settling into the worn leather seat that had been his second home for the past 5 years. "Lieutenant." Kim Nari's fingers flew across her holographic console, her face pale in the crimson light. "Sir, we're receiving an encrypted transmission. It's from the Galactic Council." Her voice carried a note of disbelief that made every head on the bridge turn. The bridge fell dead silent. For 30 long years, the Galactic Council had treated humanity like dangerous animals, keeping them locked away in the Sol system. They called humans Deathworlders, claiming they were too violent and unpredictable for civilized galactic society. Trade was forbidden. Travel beyond Earth's solar system was banned. Humanity had been forced to watch from the sidelines as other species explored the galaxy that should have been theirs too. "They're asking for our help?" Ji-hoon couldn't hide the bitter laugh that escaped his lips. "After 3 decades of calling us savages," Nari nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the dancing lights of her console. "The transmission has passed through 17 different jump gates, sir. Each relay station burned out from the quantum stress. Whatever they're running from, it's bad enough to risk permanent damage to their communication network." Ji-hoon leaned forward in his chair. "Put it through." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a reptilian alien with golden scales and trembling mandibles. His usually pristine robes were torn and stained with what looked like blue blood. This was Council Speaker Veltar, one of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, and he looked absolutely terrified. "Honored humans," Veltar began, his voice cracking with desperation, "I am Council Speaker Veltar of the Galactic Coalition. I come before you not as your superior, but as someone begging for help. The Kethrak Horde has emerged from the dark sectors. They have begun systematically exterminating the peaceful Luminar colonies." The alien's image wavered as another relay station failed somewhere in the vast network between them. "Our fleets are scattered across a dozen conflicts. Our defenses are broken. The Luminor are dying by the millions, and we cannot stop it. We need warriors who know how to fight without mercy. We need Deathworlders." Ji-hoon's jaw clenched tight. He knew about the Luminor. They were artists and philosophers, beings who had never raised a weapon in anger. Their entire civilization was built around beauty and peace. They created the most stunning art in the galaxy and wrote poetry that moved even hardened soldiers to tears. The thought of these gentle creatures being slaughtered made his blood boil. "Communications," Ji-hoon barked, his voice cutting through the tension on the bridge. "Open a priority channel to Earth Command. Tell them the Deathworlder fleet is going to war." The response from Earth came within minutes. Fleet Admiral Park Seongwa's weathered face appeared on a secure channel, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the weight of command. "Ji-hoon, are you certain about this? We've been preparing for this day, but once we leave Seoul, there's no going back. The galaxy will never see us the same way again. Sir, the Luminar need us. If we don't act now, an entire peaceful species will be wiped out." Ji-hoon's voice was steady, but everyone on the bridge could hear the underlying fury. "Besides, maybe it's time the galaxy remembered why they were afraid of us in the first place." Within hours, humanity's orbital shipyards transformed into a hive of activity unlike anything seen since the last human war decades ago. Massive construction drones swarmed around vessels that had been designed for humanity's bloodiest conflicts. These weren't the elegant curved ships favored by other galactic species. Human warships were angular, brutal, and built for one purpose: to survive and destroy in the harshest conditions imaginable. The assault carrier Iron Fist emerged from Dock 7, her hull scarred from past battles, but her weapon systems gleaming with deadly efficiency. Captain Lee Min-ho stood on her bridge watching as squadrons of fighters launched for final system checks. His pilots were the best in the human fleet, trained in the asteroid belts and gas giant storms of the Sol system. From the stealth yards came the Ghostblade, a destroyer so advanced that even humans weren't entirely sure how all her systems worked. Major Yoon Jasu commanded this shadow ship, her crew specialists in electronic warfare and silent death. They had trained for years in the cold depths of space, learning to fight in conditions that would kill most galactic species instantly. But the crown jewel of humanity's war machine was the massive dreadnought Hell's Fury. Admiral Choi Dong-yoon had commanded her through 3 major conflicts, and her armored hull bore the scars of ramming enemy vessels. She was built like a mobile fortress designed to absorb punishment that would vaporize lesser ships and keep fighting. As the fleet assembled in formation, Ji-hoon received his final orders from Earth Command. The message was simple but carried the weight of humanity's future. Show them why we're called Deathworlders, Commander. But remember, we fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Standing on his bridge, surrounded by the quiet efficiency of his crew, Ji-hoon watched as dozens of human warships formed up around the Thunderstrike. These vessels represented humanity's finest technology and most experienced warriors. They had been preparing for this moment for 30 years, training in secret, building weapons that other species would consider impossible or insane. All ships report ready, sir, Nari announced, her voice now steady with professional calm. Ji-hoon nodded and opened a fleet-wide channel. This is Commander Park Ji-hoon to all vessels. Today we leave the safety of our home system for the first time in 3 decades. We go not as conquerors, but as protectors. The galaxy branded us as dangerous, and they were right. We are dangerous to those who prey on the innocent. He paused, looking out at the stars that had been forbidden to his people for so long. Jump drives to full power. Set course for Luminar space. War is coming to the galaxy, and humanity is bringing it to those who deserve it most. The human armada engaged their hyperdrives simultaneously, tearing holes in space-time itself as they leaped toward their destiny. Behind them, Earth's orbital defenses powered down for the first time in 30 years. Ahead lay the unknown dangers of galactic war and the chance to prove that humanity's violent nature could be a force for good in a universe that desperately needed protectors willing to pay any price for justice. The Kethrak command ship Bonecrusher drifted through space like a massive steel predator. Its dark hull covered in scars from 1,000 conquered worlds. The ship was enormous, nearly 3 kilometers long, with weapon batteries that could crack planets and armor thick enough to shrug off nuclear blasts. It had been the flagship of War Chief Gregtal for over 20 years. And in all that time, it had never retreated from a battle. Gregtal stood on his command throne, towering figure with 4 arms and skin like black stone. His red eyes glowed as he watched the tactical display showing the latest Luminar world burning beneath his fleet's relentless bombardment. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were now nothing but smoking craters. The gentle Luminor had offered no resistance, just as they never did. It made the conquest almost boring. Another world falls to the Horde, he growled, his voice like grinding metal. How many does that make, Sub-Commander Vexter? Second in command. Smaller but equally vicious Kethrak, with cybernetic implants covering half his face, consulted his datapad. 17 worlds conquered? Lord Commander. The Luminar fleet scattered after the first 3 battles. Their council allies have abandoned them completely. Gregtal's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The Galactic Council was weak. Their military doctrine focused on defensive actions and minimal casualties. They fought wars like it was some kind of gentleman's game, always trying to minimize damage and preserve life. It disgusted him. War was about dominance, about showing your enemies that resistance was futile. Suddenly, the bridge's alarm system began wailing. Sub-Commander Vextar's cybernetic eye glowed brighter as data streamed across his implants. Lord Commander, our long-range scouts are reporting unknown vessels approaching the system. They're not Galactic Council designs. Gregtal's 4 arms tensed. In all his years of conquest, he had cataloged every ship design used by the Council races. He knew their weaknesses, their tactics, their limitations. An unknown fleet meant potential complications to his perfectly planned campaign. Show me these vessels, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been challenged. The main tactical display shifted, revealing a formation of ships that made Greyctales' blood run cold. These weren't the elegant, curved vessels favored by the council races. Where council ships looked like works of art, these newcomers were. Brutal and efficient, all sharp angles and exposed weapon systems. They looked like they had been designed by engineers who cared nothing for beauty and everything for raw destructive power. Now what species builds ships like these? Vexstar whispered. His mechanical components worry as he processed the visual data. Grechtel studied the formation more carefully. The ships were smaller than his heavy cruisers but moved with a precision that spoke of experienced crews. Their hulls were scarred and battle-worn, suggesting these weren't parade ground pretty boys, but actual combat veterans. Most disturbing of all, their weapon systems seemed almost primitive compared to galactic standards. It's something about their configuration suggested they would be devastatingly effective. Meanwhile, toward the UES Thunderstrike Commander Park, Jihoon stood in the center of his bridge, watching the same tactical display with calculating eyes. His crew moved with quiet efficiency around him, their faces set with the grim determination of soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. "Enemy force analysis complete, sir," reported Lieutenant Kim Nari, her fingers dancing. Across multiple holographic displays, 12 heavy cruisers, each one about twice the size of our largest ships, 37 smaller vessels, mostly destroyers and frigates. Total enemy firepower advantage is approximately 4-1. Any normal military commander would have ordered an immediate retreat. The smart tactical choice would be to fall back, regroup, and wait for reinforcements. But Jihoon wasn't a normal commander, and his crews weren't normal soldiers. They were Deathworlders, forged in the fires of Earth's endless conflicts and tempered by 3 decades of isolation and preparation. Captain Lee Jihoon spoke into his "Come unit," his voice carrying across the fleet's command channel. "Take the Iron Fist and her escort squadron around their left flank. Use the asteroid field for cover and hit them where they're not expecting it." Captain Lee Minho's voice came back steady and confident. "Understood, Commander. My pilots have been dying for a real fight. These alien bastards picked the wrong species to mess with." Jihoon switched channels. "Major Yoon, your Ghost Blade and the Stealth Squadron will move to their supply lines. I want their rearguard eliminated before they even know you're there." Major Yoon Jisu's response was barely a whisper. As befitted someone who commanded humanity's most advanced stealth vessels, "Copy that, sir. We'll be their worst nightmare." Finally, Jihoon opened a channel to the fleet's heavy assault group. "Admiral Choi, take the Hell's Fury and the Dreadnought Squadron straight down their throat. Show them what happens when they threaten innocent people." Admiral Choi Dong-yoon's laugh was like the sound of grinding stone. "With pleasure, Commander. The Hell's Fury hasn't had a proper fight in years. Time to remind the galaxy why they fear human engineering." The human fleet began to spread out in a formation that would have made any council tactician call for immediate psychiatric evaluation. Instead of maintaining the traditional long-range standoff that characterized galactic warfare, the humans were closing to point-blank range, where their supposedly primitive weapons would be most effective. Lieutenant Kim Nari looked up from her communications console, her eyes bright with emotion. "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from the Luminar survivors on the planet below. They're calling us angels of death. They say they never believed anyone would come to help them." Jihoon felt a cold smile spread across his face. Angels of death. He liked that. For 30 years, the galaxy had called humanity too dangerous for civilized space. They had been terrified of what humans might do if they were allowed to leave their home system. Today, they were about to find out that their fears were completely justified. "Signal all ships," Jihoon commanded, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's long-suppressed fury. "Battle stations. Today we show the galaxy what Deathworlders can do when we fight for something worth dying for." Across the human fleet, crews that had trained for decades in the harsh environments of the Sol system prepared for their first real battle. They had grown up hearing stories of the wars that had forged their people, of the desperate struggles that had turned humanity into the most dangerous species in known space. Now it was their turn to write the next chapter in that bloody history. The Kethrak had conquered 17 worlds without facing serious resistance. they had grown comfortable. With easy victories and terrified enemies, they were about to learn that humans were neither easy nor terrified, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe was someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The first shots of the battle came without warning. Gractyl was still studying the strange human ships when the Thunderstrike's main guns opened fire. But these weren't the elegant energy beams he expected. Instead, massive chunks of metal screamed through space at incredible speeds, slamming into his forward cruisers with the force of meteors. "What kind of primitive weapons are those?" Beckstar shouted, as one of their heavy cruisers simply crumpled. Under the impact, kinetic rounds punched through energy shields like they didn't exist. Tearing massive holes in holes that were supposed to be indestructible, Gractyl watched in growing horror as the human fleet completely ignored every rule of civilized galactic warfare. Council races fought at safe distances using precise energy weapons in carefully orchestrated duels. These humans were charging straight at his fleet like wild animals, their ships bristling with what looked like ancient ballistic weapons. "Sir, the Iron Fist is launching fighters," one of his bridge officers screamed. The assault carrier's launch bays opened like the mouth of some metal beast, spitting out dozens of small human fighters. But these weren't the slow, careful pilots Gractyl was used to fighting. The human craft moved with impossible agility, pulling turns and accelerations that should have turned their pilots into paste. "Captain." Lee Minho's voice crackled through the squadron's comm system as he led his fighters in a diving attack that defied physics. "Go, squadron. Remember your training. These aliens have never faced humans before. Show them what Deathworld evolution produces." His fighter pulled a 90-degree turn at speeds that would have killed any other species instantly. Human pilots had trained in the crushing gravity wells of gas giants and the radiation storms of solar flares. What would cripple alien pilots only made them fight harder. "Lieutenant," I saw. Haimi's fighter screamed past the Kethrock cruiser's Skullbreaker, her railgun spitting metal slugs that tore through the alien ship's hull like paper. "Not their shields," she shouted to her squadron. "Humans don't play by their rules." The Kethrak point defense systems tried to track the human fighters, but they moved too fast and too unpredictably. Where alien pilots flew in formation and followed tactical doctrine, humans fought like they were born in space itself. They used debris fields for cover, fired from impossible angles, and pulled maneuvers that would have been suicide for any other species. Meanwhile, something far more terrifying was happening in the rear of the Kethrock formation. Major Yoon. Jesu's stealth destroyer Ghostblade had been invisible to their sensors, moving through space like a hunting predator. Her crew had spent years training in the asteroid belts of Sol, learning to fight in conditions that would kill most galactic species instantly. The Ghost Blade materialized behind 3 Kethrak destroyers like a nightmare stepping out of the void. Her hull was painted black as space itself, covered in sensor-absorbing materials that made her nearly impossible to detect. The Kethrak crews never even knew she was there until it was too late. "Launch nuclear torpedoes," Major Yoon ordered. Calmly, her voice steady as ice. Full spread. The words sent chills through any human who heard them, but they were meaningless to the Kethrak. Nuclear weapons had been banned in galactic warfare for centuries, considered too barbaric and destructive for civilized species. The aliens had never encountered fission weapons before, and their energy shields were completely useless against the raw atomic fury that humans had perfected. 6. Nuclear torpedoes streaked toward the Kethrak destroyers, each one carrying enough destructive power to level a city. The alien shields flickered uselessly as the warheads detonated in brilliant flashes of nuclear fire. 3 enemy ships simply vanished in the explosions, vaporized instantly by temperatures hotter than the core of a star. Impossible. Gractyl roared from his command throne as his carefully planned formation fell apart. What kind of savages use atomic weapons in space combat? But his horror was just beginning. Admiral Choi Dong-yoon's massive dreadnought, Hell's Fury, was bearing down on his flagship like an unstoppable force of nature. The human ship was taking hits from every Kethrak weapon in range, her armored hull glowing red-hot from energy impacts. But she wasn't slowing down or changing course. Sir, they're not even trying to avoid our fire. Vexstar screamed, his cybernetic implants sparking from data overload. They're just absorbing the damage. Admiral Choi stood on his bridge like a statue carved from stone, his face scarred from decades of combat. He had fought in the asteroid wars, commanded ships through solar storms, and survived battles that would have broken lesser men. His crew worked around him with the same cold efficiency, their hands steady on controls, even as enemy fire shook their ship. Ramming speed, he ordered calmly, as if he was discussing the weather. These aliens are about to learn why we conquered our Deathworld. The Hell's Fury was built like a flying fortress, her hull designed to absorb punishment that would vaporize other ships. Human engineers had learned their lessons from Earth's harsh environment, building vessels that could survive in conditions that would destroy anything else in the galaxy. While other species built beautiful ships that looked like works of art, humans built ugly, functional death machines that could take incredible damage and keep fighting. The massive dreadnought smashed into the bone crusher with the force of a small asteroid, her reinforced prow designed specifically for ramming attacks. The impact sent shockwaves through both vessels, but the difference in construction philosophy became immediately obvious. The Hell's Fury's hull crumpled but held together, her internal structure designed to absorb and distribute impact forces. The Kethrak flagship, built for intimidation rather than survival, began to break apart under the stress. Boarding parties, prepare for assault, Admiral Choi commanded as his ship's airlocks aligned with the enemy hull.
Ow.
Show them why humans are the apex predators of the galaxy. Human marines in powered armor began cutting their way through the bone crusher's hull with plasma torches, preparing to fight hand-to-hand in the corridors of the enemy ship. They had trained for zero-gravity combat in conditions that would kill most species, and they moved through space like they were born to it. Greg Toll watched his mighty fleet falling apart around him. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds were being destroyed by weapons that seemed almost primitive. His warriors, who had terrorized the galaxy for decades, were fleeing in panic from enemies who fought without fear or mercy. "All ships retreat," finally screamed, his pride shattered by the reality of human warfare. "Fall back to the outer system." But it was too late for many of his vessels. Human fighters swarmed over the slower Kethrak ships like hungry predators, their railguns and missiles tearing through holes that had never been designed to face such brutal, direct attacks. The Ghostblade continued her deadly work from the shadows, appearing just long enough to launch another spread of nuclear death before vanishing back into the void. As the surviving Kethrak ships limped away from the battlefield, their crews, traumatized by their first encounter with human warfare, Grechtel stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In less than an hour, these unknown Deathworlders had shattered a fleet that had been conquering worlds for 20 years. "What are they?" he whispered, his forearms trembling with a fear he had never felt before. What kind of species fights like that? On the Thunderstrike's bridge, Commander Jihoon watched the enemy retreat with grim satisfaction. "Signal all ships, secure from battle stations, and begin rescue operations for any Luminar survivors." Today, the galaxies learned that humanity isn't just dangerous to our enemies, we're lethal. The first battle was over, but both sides knew this was just the beginning. The Kethrak had finally met an enemy that could match their brutality, and the humans had announced their return to galactic affairs in the most dramatic way possible: the burned wreckage of Kethrak. War machines littered the crystalline landscape of Luminor Prime like metal tombstones. Commander Park Jihoon walked through what had once been a prisoner camp, his combat armor still smoking from the fierce ground battle.
Ow.
The ceramic plates were cracked and scorched, testament to the brutal fighting that had raged for 6 hours. Straight around him, his Marines moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had fought through hell and emerged victorious. These weren't the same men and women who had left Earth 3 weeks ago. Battle had hardened them, turning them from trained soldiers into something far more dangerous. They had learned what it meant to be humanity's sword in the darkness of space. Sergeant Han Kiwoo approached, pulling off his helmet to reveal a face that told the story of their campaign. A plasma burn scarred his left cheek, and his eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much death. But he stood straight, his voice steady as he delivered his report. "Commander, we've cleared the last Kethrak stronghold. The bastards are pulling out of the system completely. Looks like they're finally learning that humans don't give up. He paused, looking around at the devastation. Found about 300 Luminar survivors in the deep cells. Captain Shin's medical team is working on them now. Ji-hoon nodded, feeling the weight of command settle heavier on his shoulders. 3 systems liberated, 12 major battles fought, and countless smaller skirmishes. The human fleet had carved a path of destruction through Kethrock space that would be remembered for generations. But the cost had been terrible. The Ghost Blade, Major Yune Jizu's pride and joy, was now little more than a floating wreck. The stealth destroyer had pushed too far into enemy territory during the Battle of Sigma Centauri, her crew fighting to the last breath to protect a convoy of refugee ships. Yune herself was in critical condition in the Thunderstrike's medical bay. Her body broken, but her spirit undefeated. Captain Lee Minho's once mighty fighter. Squadron was down to 18 pilots from the original 42. Each loss had been like losing family, but the survivors fought with the fury of avenging angels. They had learned to use their grief as a weapon, channeling their pain into devastating attacks that sent Kethrak pilots fleeing in terror. The Hell's Fury bore the scars of Admiral Choi Dong-yoon's aggressive tactics. The massive dreadnought had rammed enemy vessels in 3 separate battles. Her hull now more patch metal than original armor. She was still fighting, still bringing destruction to humanity's enemies with every salvo from her massive guns. Near the medical station, Captain Shin Yuna worked tirelessly over a young Luminor child, whose crystalline body had been shattered by Kethrock torture devices. Her medical team had saved hundreds of lives across the campaign, often working under fire. Ass battles raged around them. They had learned to perform surgery in zero gravity, treat wounds caused by alien weapons, keep fighting even when their own ships were falling apart. Elder Lumera approached slowly, her crystalline form catching the light of the systems. Twin sons. The Luminor leader had aged visibly during the occupation, her once bright inner glow now dim with sorrow. But there was something new in her faceted eyes as she looked at the human commander. Hope. Commander Ji-hoon, she said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. We do not understand your species. We have watched you fight for 3 weeks now, and still we cannot comprehend how you do what you do. Your warriors throw themselves into battles that should be certain death, yet somehow you continue to win. She gestured with one delicate arm toward the battlefield where human marines were still hunting down the last Kethrak holdouts. You fight as though death holds no fear for you. How is this possible? What drives you to such extremes? Ji-hoon looked up at the alien sky, where the aurora-like lights of Luminar Prime danced in colors that had no names in human language. He thought about Earth, so far away now, and the long journey that had brought humanity to this moment. Decades of isolation, the years of preparation, the moment when they had finally been called to war. Elder, we come from a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years, he said quietly. Ice ages that lasted for centuries. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. Diseases that wiped out entire civilizations. Predators that could tear us apart with their bare claws. He pointed to where Sergeant Han was helping a group of Luminar children board a medical transport. Every human alive today is descended from survivors. Our ancestors didn't live because they were the strongest or the smartest. They lived because, when everything seemed hopeless, when death was certain, they kept fighting anyway. Elder Lumera's glow brightened slightly as she processed his words. You were saying that suffering made you strong? Not just suffering, Ji-hoon replied, watching as his marines worked to clear rubble from a collapsed shelter. We learned that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to become the thing that others fear. The galaxy called us Deathworlders, and they were right. We are death to those who prey on the innocent. Lieutenant Kim Nera's voice crackled through his cum system, interrupting the philosophical moment with harsh reality. Sir, long-range sensors are picking up massive fleet movements. The main Kethrock armada is massing at the Nexus Gate. Intelligence. Estimates over 200 ships, including their super dreadnoughts. Ji-hoon felt a cold smile spread across his face. The Nexus Gate was the central hub of this sector, a massive space station that controlled jump routes to dozens of systems. If the Kethrak were gathering there, it meant they were preparing for one final, desperate battle to break human momentum. "What's our fleet status?" he asked, already knowing the answer would be grim. 37 ships still combat-capable, sir. Hell's Fury is running on backup power, and half our fighters are held together with spare parts and prayers. But Nari paused, and Jihoon could hear the fierce pride in her voice.
But the...
"Crews are ready, sir. They want to finish this." Around them, the liberation of Luminar Prime continued. Human Marines shared their rations with freed prisoners. Medics worked to save lives that had seemed beyond hope. And engineers began the long process of repairing the damage caused by months of occupation. It was everything humanity fought for. The chance to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Jihoon activated his comm system, opening a channel to every human ship in the system. His voice carried across space to reach crews that had followed him through hell and emerged as legends. "All ships. This is Commander Jihoon. Intelligence reports the Kethrak are massing their entire remaining fleet at the Nexus Gate. Over 200 ships. Everything they have left. They're planning one final battle to crush us before we can liberate any more of their conquests." He paused, looking around at the evidence of what humanity could accomplish when they fought for something greater than themselves. "We're outnumbered 6-1. Our ships are damaged, our crews are exhausted. Any sane tactical analysis would say we should retreat and call for reinforcements." His smile was visible even through his helmet's faceplate. "But we're not sane, are we? We're humans. We're Deathworlders. And we're going to show the galaxy one final time why they were right to be afraid of us." The response came back immediately from every ship in the fleet, a roar of agreement that seemed to shake space itself. These were the descendants of warriors who had fought saber-toothed tigers with pointed sticks, who had sailed across unknown oceans in wooden boats, who had walked on the moon when other species were still discovering fire. "Signaled the fleet," Jihoon commanded. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. It's time to end this war. Duh." The Nexus Gate hung in space like a massive metal flower. Its petals stretched across 50 kilometers of void. Each arm of the ancient station controlled hyperspace routes to dozens of star systems, making it the most strategically important location in this entire sector of the galaxy. Now it bristled with Kethrak warships like some diseased growth. Over 200 vessels of every size and class. War Chief Graktel stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Skull Throne, watching his assembled armada with grim satisfaction. Every ship that had survived the human campaign was here, along with reinforcements called back from distant conquests. Heavy dreadnoughts that could crack moons. Fast attack cruisers designed for hunting down fleeing enemies and swarms of fighters that had terrorized peaceful worlds for decades. "This time will be different," he growled to his assembled commanders via holographic link. "We know their tactics now. We know their weaknesses. When they arrive, we will be ready." But even as he spoke the words, Grektel felt a chill of doubt. The humans had proven themselves capable of impossible things, had shown a willingness to sacrifice that defied all logic. They fought like beings possessed by the spirits of war itself, and even his most experienced warriors whispered about them in fearful tones. The hyperspace alarms began wailing as reality tore open near the station. 37 human ships dropped out of hyperspace in a formation that should have been suicide against such overwhelming odds. Out their head came the Hell's Fury, Admiral Choi Dong-yoon's scarred dreadnought looking more like a flying wreck than a warship. The massive vessel's hull was a patchwork of emergency repairs, welded armor plates, and jury-rigged systems. Her original sleek lines were lost beneath layers of battle damage, but she moved with the deadly grace of a predator that had learned to hunt while wounded. Behind her came the rebuilt Iron Fist, the crippled Thunderstrike, and the remains of humanity's expeditionary fleet. Admiral Choi Dong-yoon stood on his bridge like a statue carved from granite, his uniform torn and stained from weeks of continuous combat. His crew worked around him with the desperate efficiency of people who knew this was their last battle. Half the bridge systems were offline, and they could hear the structural groaning of a ship pushed far beyond its design limits. All ships. This is Admiral Choi. His voice echoed across the fleet channels with the authority of someone who had led from the front in every battle. We are outnumbered 10-1, by any reasonable standard. We should retreat and wait for reinforcements. But humans have never been reasonable. Captain Lee Minho's voice came back over the com, filled with the dark humor that had kept his pilots sane through the nightmare of the campaign. Sir, my pilots prefer impossible odds, makes victory more satisfying. Besides, running away isn't really our style. The human fleet began to accelerate toward the massive Kethrak formation, their engines burning at maximum output. Where any other species would have tried to maintain distance and fight a careful battle of attrition, the humans were charging straight into the teeth of the enemy defense. Commander, Park Ji-hoon watched from the Thunderstrike's bridge as his ship shuddered from a direct hit that knocked out main power. Urgency lighting bathed everything in red, and he could smell the acrid smoke of burning circuits. But his crew never stopped working, their hands steady on manual controls, as they prepared to fight the ship like their ancestors had fought with swords and spears. Manual firing control on all weapons, he ordered calmly, as if losing main power in the middle of the biggest battle in human history was just another minor inconvenience. Helm, steer us toward that battleship. If we're going down, we're taking some of them with us. The battle became a swirling chaos of destruction that defied every tactical manual ever written. Human ships rammed enemy vessels when their weapons failed. Marines fought boarding actions in the vacuum of space, and pilots performed maneuvers that should have been physically impossible. Lieutenant Song Hyeme's fighter screamed through formation of Kethrak interceptors, pulling G-forces that would have killed any other species instantly. Her squadron followed her in maneuvers that seemed to ignore the laws of physics, their human physiology allowing them to survive acceleration that would turn alien pilots into paste. Ghost leader to all fighters, she called out over the radio. As she rolled her craft through a gap between two enemy cruisers, remember what we learned in the Jupiter storms. These aliens can't match our reflexes. Hit them fast and hard. Captain Shin Yuna's medical teams worked miracles throughout the battle, treating wounded in conditions that would have been impossible for any other species. When the Iron Fist's medical bay was breached, they set up emergency surgery stations. On the hull of the ship, working in vacuum suits as the battle raged around them. "Get me a plasma welder and a roll of hull tape," she shouted to her assistant as she worked to save a pilot whose fighter had been shot out from under him. "We're not losing anyone today if I can help it." The turning point came when the Hell's Fury, her hull glowing red-hot from enemy fire, smashed directly into the skull, thrown in a ramming attack that sent shockwaves through both fleets. The human dreadnought's reinforced prow tore through the Kethrak flagship's armor like it was made of paper, and Admiral Choi's voice echoed across the battlefield as his ship began to break apart. "This is for every innocent life you took, you bastards." War Chief Grakdal found himself trapped on the bridge of his dying ship, watching as his carefully assembled armada fell apart around him. The humans fought with a fury that transcended mere tactics, their crews pushing damaged ships and wounded bodies far beyond any reasonable limit. As the life support systems failed and the bridge began to fill with toxic smoke, Grakdal's final words echoed across the battlefield. "What? What are you?" Commander Ji-hoon's response was broadcast on all frequencies, carried by relay stations to every corner of the galaxy. "We are humanity. We are Deathworlders. And we protect those who cannot protect themselves." The final Kethrak vessel exploded in a brilliant fireball, marking the end of a reign of terror that had lasted for decades. But the cost of victory was written in the twisted wreckage of human ships scattered across the battlefield. Of the 37 vessels that had entered the battle, only 19 limped away under their own power. Thousands of Earth's finest warriors had given their lives in the desperate fight, their sacrifice ensuring that the Kethrak horde would never again threaten peaceful species. The survivors gathered their dead and began the long journey home, carrying with them the knowledge that they had changed the galaxy forever. Months later, Commander Park Ji-hoon stood before the assembled Galactic Council no longer as a representative of a quarantined species, but as an honored defender of the innocent. The great chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all of them watching the scarred human commander with a mixture of awe and respect. Elder Lumara spoke for all the rescued colonies, her crystalline voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Let it be recorded in the annals of history that when darkness came for the innocent, when evil threatened to consume entire worlds, the Deathworlders stood as our shield. Let humanity take their rightful place among the stars, not as conquerors seeking glory, but as guardians willing to sacrifice everything for those who cannot fight for themselves. The council chambers erupted in unanimous approval. Delegates from species that had once feared humanity now standing to applaud the warriors who had saved them. Humanity's long exile from galactic civilization was finally over. Ended not by politics or diplomacy, but by the willingness to bleed for strangers. As Gioan looked out through the great viewing ports at the stars beyond, he thought of all the gentle species scattered across the galaxy who might one day need protection. He thought of the human warriors ready to provide it, of the ships being built in Earth's orbital yards, of the young pilots training in the asteroid belts of Sol. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, populated by predators who preyed on the weak and innocent. But now it had guardians who understood that, sometimes, to preserve peace, one must be willing to wage war. The Deathworlders had finally come home to claim their place among the stars. The end.